We are living in troubled times. Too often, trust is replaced by doubt, congeniality by incivility, reality by perception, dialogue by monologue, and truth by misinformation. Meaningful conversation is, at times, almost non-existent. As a result, tension and turmoil in this country seemingly have been as prevalent as the turbulence and tumult in the 1960s. Terrorist attacks, political discord, and racial unrest make many wonder if there will be a better tomorrow. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "People fail to get along because they fear each other. They fear each other because they don't know each other. And they don't know each other because they have not communicated with each other." Communication is the most effective way to resolve disputes and disagreements. Honest, open, and meaningful dialogue can resolve virtually any problem.
So, when I was growing up, I lived in the same house with my mom, but we didn't live in the same neighborhood. See, my mom never had a reason to fear or distrust the police, but for me, that was a big part of my childhood. And I learned at a young age that I would experience some things differently than my white mom because I have a black dad. For example, one of the few memories I have of my dad as a kid is seeing him yelled at and questioned by police on the street. And when they didn't like the answers he was giving them to their questions, they proceeded to aggressively question me. And I was just 8 years old. And as I grew older, that fear and distrust of police grew with me. By the time I was in high school, I was getting stopped by cops and security guards at the mall, at the bus station, on the street, and often they'd have comments about how I dressed in baggy jeans and hoodies like any other kid at the time. In high school, I was so afraid of cops that anyone in a uniform made me feel uncomfortable. And unfortunately, that experience isn't unique to me, but it's the status quo in a lot of neighborhoods across North America. Right here in Toronto, for example, black people make up 8.1% of our population. But over 1/4 of the people who were stopped by police last year to have their personal information entered into the police database were black. And that type of disproportionate interaction, when it's seen as unfair and illegitimate, breeds a distrust of law enforcement. It makes people distrust cops, who are the most visible faces of our legal system. And when people distrust law enforcement because they believe that the law is not being enforced equally across all communities, they grow to distrust their government and believe that their government works for some people, but not for all people. There is no better reminder of the relationship between policing and democracy than what happened in Ferguson, Missouri earlier this year, and is continuing to happen today. The streets of Ferguson erupted in protest after the killing of Michael Brown at the hands of a Ferguson police officer. And just like when you're boiling water, that boiling point of frustration building up in Ferguson didn't happen overnight, but rather it's the product of gradual frustration, resentment, and struggle that people have felt with their police department there. Consider this, Ferguson's population is 67% black, but only 3 of the city's 63 police officers are black. Black people in Ferguson make up 86% of the people who were stopped by police last year, and 92% of the people who were searched by police last year. Those statistics tell a story of a community that is frustrated with their police department. But it's made all the more worse by an oblivious government. While the people of Ferguson were in the street protesting, the mayor of that city was on television claiming, and I quote, that all residents of the city believe there is no racial divide in the city of Ferguson. Seriously, he said that. Now, if we're going to address this problem and avoid those boiling points, that tension like we're seeing in Ferguson right now, we can't just focus on the extreme incidents, like the death of Michael Brown, that make international news headlines and you see on television. But we also have to address the series of smaller injustices that go under the radar, but breed that distrust in the first place. And for the last few years, I've been working on a solution to those smaller injustices. I studied policing and other social justice issues at Yale University and moved back to Canada last year to found an organization called the Policing Literacy Initiative. And what we do is develop ideas that will improve the way police interact with low-income neighborhoods and communities of color. One of the highlights of this work for me over the past year is when I myself filed a complaint against 2 Toronto police officers last year. About a year ago to this day, I was standing outside my apartment building in the Little Jamaica neighborhood of Toronto. And I was on the phone with a senior person at one of the biggest international business firms in the world. He was giving me some career advice. And as we were talking things through, a police car pulled up. And in it were 2 white police officers. And they told me they received a report about a suspicious black male in the area. Now, when you're fishing for a black male in the Little Jamaica neighborhood of Toronto, you're gonna find them. So they found me, and they proceeded to question me. And I tried to explain, look, I live in this building right in front of us, I have a key that goes in the door, and I'm on an important phone call. But to them, my answers didn't matter because I was guilty until proven innocent. They asked me for identification for every address I've lived in for the last 10 years, and they also ran my name through their system to confirm I didn't have a police record. And at the end of it, they exhausted all their options, realized they had no reason to stop me in the first place, and they let me go. Now that night, I was mad. I was frustrated. And you see that kind of stuff happen to people all the time. It happened to me growing up, and I hit my limit, and I said, you know what, rather than let those feelings bottle up inside of me and contribute to distrust, why don't I try something? So I filed a complaint with the Ontario complaint system. And I took a leap of faith that maybe our government's process might bring some justice to my situation. So I filed a complaint, and as part of the complaint, I requested a mediated conversation with the 2 officers that stopped me that night. And a few weeks later, my request was granted. I sat down with them at a division station, and I told them how they made me feel. Racially profiled, stereotyped, and that I was being treated like a guilty person who had to prove his innocence, which is the opposite of how our justice system is supposed to work. And to my surprise, these officers were very receptive to my comments. They were only a few years older than me, and when I sat down and I looked in their eyes, I could see that it bothered them how they made me feel. They tried to explain to me the procedures and the protocols that guided their behavior that night. And by the end of the conversation, we didn't agree on everything, believe me, but we understood each other better. See, they left that night with a better understanding of how to treat the next young man they encounter. And I left that night with a better appreciation for the complexity of the job they have to do in our city. Since that night, I've been trying to bring that spirit of dialogue around our city because I believe that through dialogue is the only way we're going to build trust with law enforcement. And through dialogue is the only way that communities of color and low-income neighborhoods are going to have a more positive relationship with our police department. This strategy involves identifying the progressive agents of change in the police force and the progressive agents of change in the neighborhood, and bringing them together to develop a common understanding of the problems we face in our city, and also the common solutions to those problems. It means bring people together to find what are the ideas they have in common that they could implement to actually build trust with law enforcement. Ideas like increased use of the complaints process and mediated conversations, like what I experienced. Ideas like having officers wear body cameras on their uniforms to record their interactions with citizens, which if you look around the world has proven to be a way of not only improving the way police treat citizens, but also how citizens treat police. And it also means bringing these people together to develop strategies to reduce the overall number of police stops we have in our city, and to get that disproportionate figure smaller. Now, this idea is met with a lot of resistance. You're talking about a problem that has existed in our city and other parts of the world for decades. There's a distrust that generations of people have been born into in Canada to distrust police, to feel like police are not there to protect and serve them, but to protect and serve other people. But every time I get a progressive police officer in the same room as a progressive member of the community, everyone is surprised by how much they actually have in common. And it's those experiences that feed my optimism and this relentless pursuit of a society where everyone believes that the police are there for them. Now, it wasn't until I started advocating for these ideas that my mom ever learned about this part of my life. So when I was a kid, I never told her any of this stuff. I figured she's older, she's white, she's not gonna understand, and she's not gonna relate. But I was wrong. See, improving our justice system is a high-stakes conversation that everyone has to participate in. If we're going to strengthen our democracy, we have to challenge ourselves, question our biases and preconceptions, and understand by putting ourselves in other people's shoes how they experience life in our society. We all deserve to live in a society, in a city, in a country, in a world where every mother and every son, just like every father and every daughter who live in the same house, also live in the same neighborhood, because the law is being enforced on all people equally. It is only then that we can say and also believe that our government works for all of us and not just some of us. Thank you very much.
In response to the tension and turmoil, disturbance and disorder experienced in various parts of the country, including Cleveland, as a result of conflicts in race relations and the administration of justice, Begin the Conversation is a proactive, innovative, open community forum and dialogue on race relations and justice, designed to lead to a fruitful relationship based on trust between justice system partners and the community. This program started in Lake County in 2015 and can serve as a model for other communities. Knowing what I know about this, I could call this program Begin the Uncomfortable Conversation. For the public officials involved in this effort, such as judges, prosecutors, police chief, and the school superintendent, I'll appropriate an apt quote used by U.S. Senator Sherrod Brown on Monday of this conference, where he quoted President Abraham Lincoln, quote, "I've got to go out to these meetings and get my public opinion bath," close quote.
In 2015, with common interests and goals to promote justice, improve race relations, and community policing by increasing awareness and understanding, strengthening relationships, building trust, improving communications, and implementing solutions, a group of Lake County community leaders joined together to create a forum with the name Begin the Conversation. The purpose was to seek an understanding of the real issues regarding race relations and the administration of justice in our own community, and to determine what could be done to effectively address those issues.
By the way, for those of you that can't read this, this is the talk. White Americans, they've got birds and bees going through the air. African Americans, they've got guns and the justice system. So I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Deacon Jones. He's currently serving as deacon at St. John's Baptist Church. Deacon Jones has been the president of the Lake County branch NAACP for the last 6 years and an active member of the organization for over 30 years before retiring as a private business owner Deacon Jones was employed at Lubrizol, one of the largest chemical companies in the country, in a collaborative effort with prosecutor Charles Colson and Mrs. Deborah Foley. Deacon Jones assisted in creating Begin the Conversation, a committee dedicated to improving race relations in Lake County. As a 48-year resident of Lake County, Deacon Jones has actively participated in the pursuit of social justice, community improvement, and equality for all. So, Deacon, why begin the conversation?
We are here today to educate the American Judges Association on the successfulness of the Begin the Conversation forum. Beginning our conversation has created a community that embodies the definition of change, one that is open to building healthy and trusted relationship between residents and the individuals appointed, elected, and employed to ensure safety and protection of life and civil liberties. Our forum provides invaluable information to the public, covering a wide variety of subject matters, but it also provides constituents a platform to educate community leaders of the unmet need and areas of improvement. This type of open dialogue has been essential in the trust we are building within our community. As we continue to grow in subject matters important to our residents, we find ourselves, as well as our community, becoming more informed and more self-aware and more accepting of responsibility. We're also seeing the effect of forum procedural fairness, organizational accountability, and increased individual participation in bettering our community. As a group, we set out on a mission to educate our constituents, build better relationships, growing in our community in love, trust, and respect. We brought hard topics to the community, and we forced one another out of our comfort zone. This is a procedure that has created a lifelong partnership between our constituents and the businesses and leaders that aid in our continued growth. We are proud to be part of this trend-setting forum that will aid in changing and building relationships within our community now and in the future.
I'd like to next introduce a second panelist. Charles E. Colson has served as the elected prosecuting attorney of Lake County, Ohio since 1995. Mr. Colson earned his Juris Doctor degree at the University of Akron School of Law in 1974 and his Bachelor of Arts degree from Kent State University in 1970. Mr. Colson, why is the prosecutor here?
I'll never forget the day that I got the telephone call from Deacon Jones, the president of the NAACP, excuse me, I'm sorry, and said, Chuck, we've got to do something. We've got to make sure that if we have an incident in Lake County, we don't have that type of problem that we're seeing in Ferguson, we're seeing in Baltimore, and we're seeing in other cities across the country, including Cleveland. And in discussing it, it seemed to us that it was clear that the minority community did not trust the legal system in those cities where this turmoil had erupted. And during that turmoil, it also seemed to us that because of it, people with their own agendas were taking advantage of situations. Sometimes those people would come out of the area to assert their own agendas. And we wanted to make sure that that didn't happen in Lake County. So we put together this committee that has law enforcement, judges, business people, educators, clergy. And we went out and tried to pick the leaders that had some sort of constituencies, such as superintendents of school, church pastors, so that we could get everybody involved in talking about race and the criminal justice system. And we did that in a number of ways. We did it by having large meetings of 300 people where we invited the community and they ask us the tough questions and we talk to them. And we did it by going to small meetings. We'd go to churches. We would go to community rooms and libraries. And we would meet with minority groups. And we would answer their tough questions. The purpose was so that they could get to know us. And know if something would happen then, they would know that they could come to us. We're training them just as they're training us. They're training us in their opinions and their understanding of the criminal justice system. And we're trying to tell them how the criminal justice system really works. So it's a two-way conversation. And we find that when these meetings are over, everybody feels better, they have a better understanding. So if something would happen in Lake County, they would feel free to come talk to me, to meet with me. The community leaders would already know me, and they would tell their constituents that the system is going to work and we're going to do our best. Because it came clear to us that the minority community in Lake County clearly believes that the police stop them more often, that they get longer sentences. They believe that, even though it may not be true. We also found out in one of our first meetings that we had to expand our committee a little bit, in the sense that questions keep coming about jobs, minorities getting jobs, and we realized that we had to focus also on minorities getting jobs and having diversity in the workplace, because that, if minorities have a stake in the community, that is better for everybody. But we've just started. We know this is a long-term project, and we're just beginning the conversation.
I'm Deacon Jones from St. John's Baptist Church in Painesville, president of Lake County Branch NAACP, and I'd like to welcome each and every one of you for taking a valuable time to be part of the conversation on race relations and justice in our own cities, community, and Lake County. Your attendance says a lot about the people sitting here this evening. We are the ones called to serve. About 6 months ago, we were reading about the unrest and violence in places like Ferguson, Baltimore, Charleston, and even in our own city to the west, Cleveland. For some, the violence touched us personally. One of the women killed during the prayer session at Charleston's church was someone I knew. Her son and I served in the army together. His mother, 87 years old, cooked me a million dinners in her kitchen. She was the oldest person shot that day by a depraved young man who wanted to start a race war. Deborah Foley and Ellen Foley Kessler, nephew, coached the nephew of another victim that day, who was one of the youngest killed during the devout prayer service. It's a small world. I grew up in the South, and I knew what sitting in the back of the bus was like. It was strictly yes and no, sir. I understand my place when called by the country to serve. I did so gladly. In the end, I was extremely proud of the fact that I did. In 1968, I was in the military, and I was sent here to Painesville, the Lake County, to the missile site. I was glad to get here because I left a site down in Louisiana. So I knew that coming to the site here in Lake County, Ohio, everything was going to be absolutely perfect. My family and I had a mobile home, which people in the military call mobile home because we moved so much. We had a 6-month-old mobile home that we had moved here. When I got to Lake County, Ohio, there wasn't one mobile home park in Lake County that would allow a black family to move in. So I was disappointed, but that's life, absolutely, totally. Even though I knew I was sitting here as a staging ground for Vietnam. Because at that time, you come here, you're going to Vietnam. But that's neither here nor there. We did our job, and we were thankful for God to do it. The revelations of who I wanted to came through in a series of understanding lessons that began with a simple conversation that held at various points throughout my life. It's the same conversation I have with my children and grandchildren. We're not about hate or violence, because we have been taught by the greatest teacher we know. Our task is to love and to seek understanding. That is why you and I are here today. In Lake County, we really haven't witnessed real community violence, judicial misconduct, or police harassment. However, we have talked a lot about this issue. We asked ourselves how we can keep and improve Lake County to remain the county where all of us are important and valued. These concepts impact every person in this room, young, old, black, white, Latino, rich, poor, professional, blue collar, male or female. To To that end, we reached out to our community leadership to begin the conversation about race relationship, justice in Lake County. We truly wanted to hear the truth, both good and bad, and begin building from there. As president of the NAACP, I called the county chief legal officer, Prosecutor Chuck Colson, and asked Deborah Foley, medically retired from the United Way, to help organize and solidify our mission. They are great servants. We began to call each other others. No one turned us down. 2 common plea judges, 2 commissioners, 3 police chiefs, 3 superintendents, 10 pastors and ministers, and representing the local radio station, chambers, nonprofits, college, elected officials, the sheriff, business owners, all became active committee members. Their names are listed on the handout, and we want you to meet and talk with them and get to know them. They're all good people who want to do the right thing at the right time. Will all the committee members please stand and be recognized? Our group mission is to educate and get you involved, and good things are happening. Painesville Superintendent John Shepard and Lake Area College Provost Brian DeBoy are formulating a program to involve students as active leaders and become mediators when conflict happens. During tonight's section, you will hear a lot of leaders who want to share their thoughts on race relations and justice. Then it is your turn. Every respectful comment is encouraged because we are in the same place with the same mindset to begin the conversation and work together.
Our next participant is Chief Kevin Knight. He has been with the Mentor Police Department since 1981. He worked his way up through the ranks, serving as patrol supervisor, Detective Bureau Commander, Operations Commander, Administrative Commander, and has served as Chief of Police since 2013. The Mentor Police Department has 82 sworn officers that patrol and protect an area of 28 square miles and 47,000 residents. Chief Knight has a bachelor's degree in Administration of Justice from Rockhurst University in Kansas City, Missouri, and is a graduate of the 220th session of the FBI National Academy. Chief, with 36 years in law enforcement, what can you learn and what have you learned from this?
Just over 2 years ago, I was contacted by our county prosecutor, Chuck Colson, requesting that I become a member of a committee that's going to begin to open a dialogue about race relations and the justice system within Lake County, Ohio. As head of the largest law enforcement agency in the largest city in the county, I felt that it was imperative that I be part of this process. Information from the last census and estimates taken in 2015 has indicated that only about 1% of the population of the city of Mentor is African American. The perception throughout much of the minority residents in Lake County as well as adjacent counties is that minorities are treated unfairly by the police department. To avoid perception becoming reality, it became apparent that an important facet of this committee was to help educate the public as to how the justice system works there in Lake County, Ohio. What law enforcement can legally do and what resources they have if they feel they were treated unfairly, and to convince them that their complaints will be taken seriously. I've also come to realize as being part of this process that you need to be very careful with arrest or traffic enforcement statistics. The percentage of arrests by race will not always coincide with the racial makeup of the community. The city of Mentor is the 6th largest retail area in the state of Ohio and is the 7th largest manufacturing area in the state of Ohio. This in itself creates a very large transient population throughout a large portion of the day, drawing people from throughout the entire county as well as 3 adjacent counties. And as of now, there is no known way to accurately measure the racial makeup of a transient population. One of the most important things that I have learned and taken away from being part of this committee over the last 2 years is getting to know the other members, especially the ministers and pastors from many of the African American churches in the county. I feel it's reassuring to know that if they are made aware of an issue, that they feel comfortable enough to call me at any time, and in the same way that I can contact any of them directly if I would need their assistance. I think over the 2 years, and I would hope they all feel the same way, that a large amount of trust has been built between both us and them.
I'd like to next introduce Reverend Mike Wonka. He is the founder and CEO of Apogee Leadership Group, LLC. His company was created to help others with leadership and personal development. Pastor Mike has served many years as a senior pastor with over 250 speaking engagements, including churches, schools, and businesses, several years of experience leading organizations, mentoring, teaching leadership, among other things, and serving nearly 3 decades in corporate America before retiring in 2016. Pastor Mike, what have you got?
Thank you for the question. There are many who want what is best for the community, but cannot always agree on what that is. Now, neither group is necessarily wrong, nor are they necessarily right. They just have different and sometimes divergent perspectives. There are some who believe that the conversation really needs to be about education. The power base is set. Let's just educate our constituents on who we are and how the system works. Others believe the conversation needs to be about how do we ensure most, if not all, races have a seat at the table? How do minorities sit beside and become a major decision maker like the majority? I have learned, regardless of your perspective, respect comes when you take a stand for what is right. If the majority and the minority can have a discussion and try to jointly define what is right, we all have a better chance of moving the agenda forward. You see, the community does need an education. They need to know their elected officials and influencers throughout the cities and the county. But everyone needs to be and be perceived as being properly represented. This means there should be spaces for qualified minorities in the justice system, and in leadership positions. When you stand for what is right, some of the majority and the minority will not like what the majority and minority are doing on this committee. I have learned that there are several good people in the Begin the Conversation committee and on this panel who are taking a stand for doing what is right for our community, and this breeds respect. We're having the tough conversations regarding race. It's hard, but necessary. And it cannot be done effectively unless trust has been built. For 2 years, we have been sowing the seeds of trust with one another. We are reaping the benefits because we are having the challenging conversations internally so that we can more confidently have the race relations and justice conversations externally. In summary, achieving our purpose takes trust, a whole lot of time, and us, all of us, committing to doing the right thing. Thank you, Judge.
I have hope that in Lake County, racism will be completely eradicated. Oh, I have hope. I have hope that we can begin a dialogue today that will lead to a fruitful relationship between everyone on stage and in the audience and throughout our county. Oh, I have hope. Yes. I have hope that our county and our city will become a community filled with peace, love, hope, joy, racial equality. I have hope the next time we recite the Pledge of Allegiance, that we will say with conviction, especially when we get to that part that says, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Oh yes, justice for Sally, justice for Juanita, justice for John, and justice for Franco, justice for all. Justice for everyone in our enlarged community. I have hope. See, with that hope, it gives us a sense of responsibility that we're all in this together, and we can make our communities, our cities, our county even better than what it already is. And then we can sing that song, you know, full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Then we can sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun, our new day begun, let us march on to victory is won. I'm asking that we collectively gain victory over any semblance of racism. I'm asking that we collectively claim victory over injustice anywhere and everywhere. And I am asking that we eradicate hopelessness. When we have hope as a community, then we have a responsibility. We have a responsibility to see that our community, our cities, and our county is the best in Ohio. Brothers and sisters, I beseech you, I implore you, I urge you, I entreat you, dare I say I beg you, that when the panel comes forward, that we all would take responsibility to ask the questions, to ask the hard questions, to ask those questions that you ask when you're at home behind closed doors, that we will lift those up in public and that we will have an honest dialogue. Oh, I have hope that we can do that today. And I believe that if we do, we can make this enlarged community better than what it already is. One thing about what happened in South Carolina, even though they tried to start a race war, they have a system already in place to deal with it. See, we're blessed enough that we don't need folks from the outside to come in and tell us how to run this county. This county will be together, we can make this county even better than what it already is. Do I have your commitment? Do I have your commitment?
I'd like to next introduce John T. Shepard. He is responsible for all day-to-day operations of the school district, that is the Painesville City local schools. His primary focus is the safety of our students and to enhance the student achievement of the diverse student population in our schools. Superintendent Shepard's educational career spans 30 years and includes teaching and administrative experience at the high school, district, and university levels, many in Central and Southern Ohio. Superintendent Shepard holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Spanish from Ohio University and a Master of Arts degree in Education from Muskingum College. He obtained his EDS in Administrative and Superintendent's license at the Franciscan University of Steubenville. Superintendent, with a school district having a 72% minority population, what do you do to advance the conversation?
Thank you, Judge. The invitation to begin the conversation was the impetus for Lake County school districts to address the topic of race. While I lead a district with great diversity, my border districts have little to no diversity. How could I contribute to the conversation without dominating it? Did I truly understand and know what my students endure each and every day? After the first community forum hosted at our high school, I launched into educator mode. How can I teach my students and staff about race and the issues facing our society? Painesville City Schools partnered with Lake Erie College to successfully be awarded a grant from the Cleveland Foundation. The purpose of the grant was to train high school students to become diversity ambassadors for our schools. Training was held at the college to prepare the student ambassadors to facilitate discussions, mentor peers, mediate, and promote diversity within our schools and community. The first cohort of ambassadors have already launched into action with outreach to our elementary and middle school students. The diversity ambassadors are just one of the many side effects to begin the conversation. As the group engaged in more conversations, it was confirmed that our youth know little to nothing about the judicial system. Unfortunately, those students who do know the most learn from less than stellar resources. What next for our schools and begin the conversation is to partner with our local judges to visit our schools to educate about the judicial system. Another side effect from begin the conversation is the issue of immigration. You see, my community represents one of Ohio's largest Latino populations. Our Latino student count is nearly 58% and rising. The legal challenges, debate, and political climate will undoubtedly be at the forefront of what's next for Begin the Conversation.
Thank you, Superintendent. I'd like to next introduce Pastor Roderick A. Coffey I. He has been the senior pastor of Union Community Church in Concord, Ohio since May 1994. A native of Painesville, Ohio, Pastor Coffey earned a diploma of theology degree in Black Church Studies from McCreary Center, affiliated with Ashland Theological Seminary. He recently graduated in 2014 from Ashland with his Master of Arts degree in Practical Theology. Beginning in early 2008, Pastor Coffey was elected to and served 2 terms as president of the Lake County branch of the NAACP. Pastor Coffey, what do you see as your role in all of this?
First, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to be a part of the American Judges Association annual event. To begin the conversation has and is playing a significant role in my life as we cultivate and develop relationships that lead to positive outcomes in race relations. Part of my responsibility in the city of Painesville and Lake County is to shepherd the Union Community Church, which is a very diverse church, and to provide coaching and leadership development to the minority pastors in our county. Although this is a rewarding endeavor, it is not without its challenges as it relates to race and justice. The racial climate in our country today is strained, to say the least, and tensions are growing daily. Part of our training with our staff was to go through diversity training, and in that diversity training, we discussed a term, unconscious bias. Unconscious bias happens in all of our lives, and it's something that we must learn to deal with, whether we're white, black, whether we're LGBT. We have to learn that we have unconscious bias. As a pastor, I would ask that the efforts like Begin the Conversations would become the norm in our country. I would ask that those of you tasked with adjudicating throughout America and Canada, begin to gather your communities to begin the conversations about race. The challenge is to have the difficult conversations about inequities in the judicial system in order to separate facts from fiction. It is my position these discussions are often done poorly as we use the media and are often more productive by meeting with individuals that represent those underserved communities in an attempt to gain understanding and build relationships. I pray that our presentations here today will begin to foster those expected results.
All of us have a duty and an obligation to contribute to the betterment of our community and society. We can all respond to the clarion call for education and understanding, and for participation in action. During these times of tension and turmoil about race relations, justice, and the criminal justice system, we all need to step up, get involved, and be part of the solution. We can influence the course of our Lake County community, and by doing so, we can influence as well the course of society. We encourage everyone to consider getting involved in the activities and events that begin the conversation. At a minimum, we should at least incorporate the purposes and principles in our daily lives and begin the conversation with family, friends, neighbors, and others.
Our seventh and final panelist is Judge John P. O'Donnell, a colleague of mine on the bench. He has been a General Division Judge of the Lake County Common Pleas Court since January 2015. He is a lifetime Lake County resident, is a 1984 graduate of John Carroll University and a 1987 graduate of the Cleveland Marshall College of Law. He has served as an assistant prosecutor in Lake County in civil and criminal roles and was in private practice for over 20 years before taking the bench. In 1993, he was elected to serve as a councilman in the city of Willowick in Lake County. In addition to serving for nearly 14 years on council, he also served for 6 years as the Willowick Law Director. Judge O'Donnell.
Thank you, Judge. Now, we've been sitting here for the better part of about 45 minutes, and the question that I pose to each of you judges is, why should you care? Why should you care about any of this? Now, when I took my oath, one of the things that I swore to do was to administer justice without respect to persons. And I would guess that each of you, when you took your oath, that you each fully believed that you could, and you would, fairly and impartially treat all individuals without respect to persons, especially when we're talking about criminal defendants. I mean, I certainly did, and I'm going to believe that all of you fully believe that. But what does it mean to administer justice without respect to persons? Does it mean that you're to treat all similarly situated defendants in a like manner with regard to disposition? Again, I would guess that everybody probably says yes, that's what it means. But how do you determine whether John Smith, who's from rural Morrow County, Ohio, and Joe Jones, who's from Cuyahoga County, who have similar numbers and levels of convictions and the same number of prison incarcerations, how do you determine whether they are similarly situated? Now, it's a fact that the criminal justice system, at least here in the United States, is perceived by the minority community to be biased against the minority community. Now, you can deal with that perception as a judge in one of three ways. You can alternate sitting behind your desk and sitting behind your bench and doing nothing about the problem. That's one way. The second, you can go and speak out as a representative of the justice system to a general audience in a general way and try to convince people, whoever you're speaking to, that the perception of the minority community as to the justice system is not reality. Or you can try a third way. You can go into your community to the affected audience and you can listen to their questions and their concerns, and you can answer their questions and their concerns. Now, of these three ways, I'm 100% certain that the first two will not work. As to the third, I believe that with an honest, concerted, and consistent effort, that has a chance of succeeding. Now, it's vital that the trust in the criminal justice system is established in your community. Unless and until trust is established in the minority community as to the justice system, their perception will remain their reality. So, Judge Kilbane, that's why you should care.
So the purpose of Begin the Conversation is to have an open and honest conversation regarding race relations and justice in our community, to lay the groundwork through education and communication regarding our community's commitment to peace, cooperation, accountability, and equality, and to build a relationship of trust between the citizens of Lake County and community leaders. And I reiterate that quote, and this is the first time I've ever heard it when Sherrod Brown said it, but to take your public opinion bath. One of my other colleagues, Judge Richard Collins of the General Division, Lake County Court of Common Pleas, said, "Racism in any form is deplorable, despicable, and disgusting. It should not be tolerated by any person who believes in and values human dignity, basic respect, and civil rights. Only by individual and collective effort can racism be abolished. It begins in our hearts and beliefs, but it also requires action by standing up, joining the conversation, and having an open and honest dialogue among friends, family, and neighbors. Eliminating racism and promoting justice has been and will continue to be the mission and goal of the Lake County Begin the Conversation Forum." So, panelists, if someone wanted to start the conversation about race and the justice system, how would he or she go about it? And probably, since the two founders are here, Deacon Jones, Prosecutor Colson, either one of you can answer that.
I think the first thing, they should make up their mind on how they want to do it, okay? The first, you're going to have to get involved, totally. You're going to have to get people that's in the criminal justice system involved. You're going to have to get people in the community involved. So and by doing that, you'll be able to establish some grounds where you have a chance of being able to get things to moving, okay? It's very important to stress to the community that getting together and talking, having a conversation about the problem is about the only way you're going to have a chance of solving the problem. Because somewhere down the line, in order to solve it, we're going to have to talk, okay? Without talking, we've still probably been in World War I. Somewhere down the line, you're going to have to talk in order to solve problems. You're going to have to meet, you're going to have to face the issues that you're facing, you're going to have to face them, you're going to have to be able to talk about them, you're going to have to be able to ready to do something about them, because it is not easy talking about race. Even as long as we had met, and it was hard for us to actually get to the point that we would be having an open dialogue to talk about race. And we feel comfortable with each other. We feel comfortable talking about it because race is a reality, and that's it, period. So if you want to do so, if a group wants to make a change, sit down and figure out your goals, but you got to include people that's operating the system. You got to include people that's in the public.
So, are you saying that these folks out here have to be the agent of change and plant the seed?
Yes, definitely, I'm saying that.
Can I add just a brief comment?
Go ahead.
When we go to these small community meetings, sometimes they might have 8 people, sometimes they might have 30 people. And it's usually Judge O'Donnell, myself, and a police chief, Chief Knight. And we're talking to the people. The fact that a judge is there, talking to them, explaining the criminal justice system, when they ask a question about sentencing, that a judge goes through and takes the time to explain everything that they consider before they render a decision, it has a tremendous impact on the audience, especially those who are coming in there believing that the system is prejudicial against them. And so I think having judges involved is crucial to the solving the problem as far as the perception for the criminal justice system. They have to get to know you. You can't just be a name on a ballot. You can't just be a name. They need to know you as a person.
Judge O'Donnell, do you have an anecdote about judges attending meetings with people?
Well, I want to touch on what Chuck just said, because you all know that when you sentence somebody, you know the process that you go through in order to ultimately announce what the sentence is. But nobody else knows that. The only time people find out about what happens is when they hear it on the news or they read it in the paper. So when we go to these community forums, I go through the process that myself and all of my colleagues on the Lake County bench go through in order to come to a conclusion as to what that sentence should be. And just to go off of what Chuck said, the response is that people appreciate that they know what we go through and how we arrive at something, rather than just blow out there in 5 minutes, announce a sentence without any preparation.
And what about the concept of judges meeting with people?
Well, I think it's vital. We were at, myself and Chuck were at a Latino forum. What do we have, about 12 or 15 people there? And we were told that it was going to be a packed house. It was at a church. And we had our interpreter there because many of them did not speak English. And when we were finished, the pastor of the church came up and said, I think he said it to Chuck, he said, I thought there were going to be more people here. And earlier that day, he heard from some individuals who did not believe one bit that a judge would show up and talk at their church. And so I said, well, we'll come back again, you know, try and get him here again, but there's a belief that we all have the black robe and sit up high and don't know what is happening in the community. And I would tell you that to a certain extent, they're right. Because it's vital that we get out there. And I've had this discussion with Reverend Mike going back 2 years now. My belief when I came into this was we need to educate the public about the criminal justice system. And he always fought me on that. And it finally clicked in my thick skull that we got to listen. When we go there, we went to Pastor Coffey's Union Community Church, and it was a packed house. And it was a revelation to me to hear particularly one gentleman, Fred Washington, talk about his experience in the system. And all he wanted throughout the course of his life was to be listened to. So it's not so much going out and educating, it's not so much speaking at people, it's listening to what they have to say, listening to their questions, not just listening, listening to them and answering them, listening to their concerns and addressing their concerns. So that's the key to changing this perception in the minority community.
So how often do you meet? Where are these forums held? How many of you attend? I see on the board there's a large number of members of your committee involving clergy, education, criminal justice, the community, commerce. So just mechanically, how frequent are these and where are they usually held?
The meetings are usually on average about once a month, and that's the general meeting where we bring most of the people you see on the screen together as we're trying to drive the agenda forward. But we also have breakout meetings, or for example, we met quite often in preparation for this particular event. We had other meetings where we brought intel to speak about diversity and why it's good for business. So it's a small group that met then. The superintendent has met with other people as he was driving the initiative in the school system. But on average, as a general overall meeting, we do meet about once a month. And the meetings are 7:30 a.m. Usually on a weekday morning. So about once a month, we are making sure we're staying on track and are driving the agenda forward.
And how far in advance are these scheduled?
Well, we will, the general meetings we'll schedule the next one at the conclusion of the meeting. There are also the small forums that Chuck spoke about that I go to with him and also usually Chief Knight. And we have these as often as we can have them. We tell anybody that we'll meet as often as you want us to meet. We've probably had, my guess is, a dozen to a dozen and a half of these small meetings. Part of my frustration, I think Chuck and Kevin, is that there's sometimes we get 5 or 6 people, and we go through the process and we speak to them for an hour and a half or 2 hours, and there's no problem. I don't have a problem doing that, but part of the frustration is we'd like to see about 50 people so we can get a broader reach. So we're going through, we're trying to figure out as we go along how we can do that, and we're going to start hopefully after we have our next diversity session with the full committee this coming Saturday, and hopefully at that point we will be able to get into the African American churches and speak directly to the congregation. We finally figured out that it's best to do that on Sunday when everybody's gathered. So our plan is to go to where the people are and to talk, and as I said, listen and answer.
What's the general format of these sessions?
Our education session so far has usually been a threefold. Usually, who's ever representing law enforcement, myself and one of the other chiefs. Well, we take it from an aspect of somebody being stopped, a traffic stop, and what happens, what can be done, when are people arrested from that, when they are set and released. Then we go from there, and then usually Prosecutor Colson will discuss the justice part of that as far as what happens in the courts, either municipal or common pleas, and then Judge O'Donnell will usually discuss how the sentencing and what happens in the courts and stuff.
And just so you know, we're not standing up and telling the individuals. They raise their hand any time, they ask a question, we address the question, we go from there. So every time it's been an interactive dialogue.
What kind of questions do you get?
It depends upon the group. If we're talking to a Latino group, most of the questions, quite frankly, have to do with immigration. And so those are difficult questions for us to answer since none of us know immigration law, and being local elected officials, and it's a federal issue, we can't really help them too much in that, but we do give them some guidelines. The other questions that they ask are about the criminal justice system, what happens. Sometimes they want to know what their rights are, or they want to know why they were stopped. Oftentimes, I don't care what form we're at, somebody's going to say that they were stopped only because they were black, only because they were Latino, and if it had been a white person, they wouldn't have stopped. And why were they stopped? And we have to explain to them. We may not know their specific situation. They can give us their side of it, but we have to explain to them what the officer's legal duties are, what the officer's, what their constitutional rights are, and we always try to make sure that if they feel that they were wrongly stopped or they were improperly treated, that they need to make a complaint to that police department. Because every department in Lake County, and I'm sure every department across the state, or probably across the country, has some procedure where they will take citizens' complaints and process that. Most people think that they'll just go home and they're upset that they feel that they were discriminated against, but there is a complaint system that can be used that will help.
So, Chief, when an individual who is black comes to you and says, hey, I was stopped for no other reason other than being black in a 99% white city, what do you do?
Well, we take their complaint and we do a complete investigation, and we're fortunate enough to have most of our stuff computerized, that we'll look at these individual officers that they may be complaining about and look at their percentages of traffic stops and the race of the people they're writing tickets to, race of the people they're arresting, and comparing that to the average in the department stuff and see if it's out of whack. And then we get, when we take an officer complaint, we give that person who files that complaint a written receipt, And usually, in most cases, within 30 days, they get a letter from me on the disposition of that.
So how do the attendees at these forums respond to your efforts? Is there just general mingling at the end? Are there refreshments provided to provide, an opportunity to talk one-on-one?
Sometimes they have dinner afterwards, but mostly what we find is they come forward and they want to talk to us on a one-on-one. They're very appreciative that we came and we talked to them, that they could meet us. They usually have smiles on their faces, and they want to talk a little more. They don't want to go home. We had one forum where after it was about, this was at your school, Superintendent, where I think it was an hour and a half after it was over, people were still grouping around us and wanting to talk and discuss things. So that's the kind of reception we're getting. You were going to say something, Judge?
Sure. So I think the prosecutor hit it right on the head. People want to be listened to, as Chief said earlier, or Judge said. They want to know they have a voice and someone will respond to their concerns. And another forum at a church afterwards, there were about 4 or 5 men that surrounded the police chief, and they surrounded him because they were still asking questions, still engaged. So we find when we go out and talk to the community and talk with the community, it goes over very well. So some of the larger community events have been attended very well, and as the judge said earlier, we are trying to hit a lot of different places, such as the Rotary. We're going there next month. And when the conversation goes, it goes well. The tough part is just getting the conversation started, which is why we are still called Begin the Conversation. I imagine at some point we may change the name to Continue the Conversation.
There was a question, yes.
What sort of changes or programs have been implemented because you've heard people at these forums?
All right, did everybody hear the question? What kind of changes or modifications have been done since the forums have begun? All right.
I can't tell you that there's any one concrete program that has begun as a result of these conversations. And what I keep saying from the start, I take that back. Superintendent Shepard talked about the mentoring program that he started through the school system. And that's vitally important because a lot of times we're talking to adults when we go to these forums. And a lot of times it's going to be hard to change the perception of the adults. We're going to keep trying. But we're trying to get into the younger kids through these mentoring programs, and we're trying. Those of you who are in Ohio may know that in order to get into a school in Ohio to speak is nearly impossible, simply because they teach to the standardized tests, and their frustration is they don't have the time. But this is, what I was going to say initially is, this thing started over 2 years ago, and I can see no end. I can see no end line in this process because it's going to be a continuing dialogue with the community. And it's going to go on, and it's going to go on, and everybody's committed to going on as long as it takes. But the concrete programs, I think, are on their way, as I mentioned with Superintendent Shepard, and he's going to try to get school kids into the courtrooms. And I think it's a matter of bringing people in and developing things as we go, because when this started, it was a whole lot different than it is today.
So Judge, what you're saying is it's like a marriage. The conversation never ends. You just don't have one conversation and then figure it's all fixed. You've got to keep doing it and work at it every day.
But there have been some more concrete results that Judge left out. For instance, because of the Begin the Conversation and working with Lakeland Community College, which has a police academy. We offered, and through the help of Lake Erie College, we offered scholarships to send minority candidates to the police academy because we want to increase the number of minority police. We have done that. And I want to tell you, from my own personal experience, how it has changed me. When we first started this, we didn't know each other. The committee, we were all practically strangers except for a few of us. And some of the committee members kept saying, we need to have a serious conversation on race ourselves within the community. We need to bring in an expert in diversity and come and meet with us. And we've done that. We've had 2 full-day meetings, and we're having one this Saturday with they're closed-door meetings with the committee, where we come in and we talk to each other, because we do have unconscious biases. We do not understand the other person's perspective, or didn't, and we're trying to. And so we have come together as a group, the police chiefs, the superintendents, the judges, myself, everybody, we have a better understanding of how the minorities feel, how the minorities view us, and how we may have had unconscious biases that we need to work on. And this has been a very positive effect, and I can't believe it hasn't affected the way we respond to everybody else. So there's been some concrete things, but we're just beginning.
Well, hopefully that trickles down to your 30 assistant prosecutors and charging decisions and things of that sort, correct?
And the police officers. It's a trickle down. Yeah, it's got to start at the top.
All right.
More questions.
Oh, well, we can't refuse a question from Judge Connery.
I'm sorry. I really don't have a question. As past president of the American Judges Association, I want to commend Gene Lucci for his leadership and each and every one of you for all of the time and effort you put in to bring the beginning of this conversation to us. We are judges, and we have a tendency to hide behind our robes, go home at night, and not engage with the community. I think the leadership of Judge ODonnell, Judge Lucci, and others at this conference has shown us that it's high time we got off the pedestal and got into the community so that these conversations can not only begin, but continue to bring fruits and the fruits of justice for all. So we want to thank and express our appreciation to each and every one of you. We know, those of us who put together programs, how much time and effort goes into presenting one program. So this is a great, great program that you brought to us, and we want to thank each and every one of you.
Thank you. Great wrap-up.